9 years. That was how long Ethan Cole had gone without a real vacation. 9 years of being a single father, of midnight emergency calls, of putting everyone else first. And now, finally, he sat on a quiet beach, watching his son build a sandcastle, his work phone untouched for the first time in almost a decade. Then it rang. His boss called him irresponsible and fired him on the spot during an approved vacation. What Miranda Hale didn't know was that the man joining Ethan for dinner that night held the power to destroy everything she had built. So after that call, who really lost it all? Ethan Cole had not always been a man who counted years. But somewhere between his wife's funeral and his son's 9th birthday, time had become a currency he could no longer afford to spend on himself. He was 41 years old, a senior operations engineer at Meridian Technologies, and for the past 9 years, he had been the invisible backbone of a company that never once acknowledged how much it depended on him. When servers crashed at 2 in the morning, Ethan answered the call. When critical systems failed during product launches, Ethan was the one who stayed until the problem was solved. When other engineers gave up and went home to their families, Ethan remained, because he no longer had a wife waiting for him, and his son had learned to sleep through the sound of his father typing in the next room. His wife, Sarah, had passed away when their son, Lucas, was just 3 months old. A sudden illness, the doctors had said. 1 week she was healthy, laughing, planning their future. The next week, she was gone. Ethan had held their infant son at the funeral, numb with grief, and made a silent promise to be everything Lucas would ever need. But promises made in grief are often impossible to keep. The years blurred together. Ethan threw himself into work because work was predictable. Code either functioned or it didn't. Systems either ran or they crashed. There was comfort in problems that had solutions, unlike the hollow ache in his chest that never seemed to fade. He told himself he was providing for Lucas, building a stable future, being responsible. But deep down, he knew the truth. Work had become his escape, and his son had become an afterthought scheduled between emergencies. Lucas never complained. That was perhaps the most heartbreaking part. The boy had grown up understanding that his father was busy, that his father was important, that his father would make it to the school play next time. Lucas learned to heat up his own dinners, to put himself to bed, to celebrate small victories alone. He was 9 years old, and already more self-sufficient than most adults Ethan knew. 3 months ago, Lucas had asked a simple question that shattered something inside Ethan. "Dad, do you remember the last time we did something together? Just us?" Ethan had opened his mouth to answer, then realized he couldn't. He genuinely could not remember. There had been quick meals between conference calls, distracted conversations while he checked emails, half-watched movies interrupted by work emergencies. But a real moment? A complete, uninterrupted experience with his son? The memory didn't exist. That night, after Lucas had gone to bed, Ethan sat alone in the kitchen and cried for the first time since Sarah's funeral. He cried for the years he had lost, for the childhood he had missed, for the father he had failed to become. And when the tears finally stopped, he made a decision. He would take Lucas on a vacation, a real vacation. No laptop, no constant email checking, no emergency calls. Just a father and his son, finally being present with each other. It took 2 months to arrange. Ethan had accumulated so much unused vacation time that HR had actually called to verify his request wasn't a mistake. He had coordinated with his team, documented every system he maintained, created backup protocols for every possible scenario. He had done everything right, submitted the request through proper channels, and received written approval from Miranda Hale herself. Miranda was the chief operations officer, a woman whose reputation preceded her like a cold wind. She was brilliant, efficient, and utterly devoid of empathy. Employees were resources to be optimized, not people to be understood. She had approved Ethan's vacation request with a single line. "Fine. Don't let anything break while you're gone." As if Ethan had any control over that. as if he hadn't spent 9 years ensuring nothing ever broke in the first place. The beach resort was modest, a small place on the Carolina coast, nothing fancy, but perfect for what Ethan needed. The first morning, he had woken up without an alarm, a sensation so foreign it almost felt wrong. He had made breakfast with Lucas, actual breakfast, not protein bars eaten over a keyboard. They had walked to the beach together, and Ethan had watched his son run toward the waves with pure, unfiltered joy. For the first time in 9 years, Ethan Cole felt something close to peace. He was sitting on the sand, watching Lucas carefully construct a sandcastle with the intense focus of a master architect, when the phone rang. Ethan had promised himself he wouldn't answer work calls, but old habits die hard. He glanced at the screen. Miranda Hale. His stomach tightened. She never called unless something was catastrophically wrong. "Ethan!" Miranda's voice was sharp, clipped, carrying the particular coldness she reserved for people she considered beneath her. "I need you back in the office. Now." Ethan looked at Lucas, who was carefully patting sand into the shape of a tower. "Miranda, I'm on approved vacation. You signed off on it yourself. The audit preparation has hit complications, systems you built, systems only you understand. Your team is incompetent, and I need someone who actually knows what they're doing. I documented everything before I left. Jenkins has the access codes. Martinez knows the backup protocols. Jenkins is an idiot, and Martinez called in sick. I don't have time for excuses, Ethan. Get on a plane tonight." Ethan felt the familiar pressure building in his chest, the same pressure that had controlled his decisions for nearly a decade. Say yes. Apologize. Fix the problem. That was what he always did. That was who he had become. But Lucas had just looked up from his sandcastle, his young face bright with accomplishment. "Dad, look! I made a moat." "That's amazing, buddy," Ethan said, his voice cracking slightly. Into the phone, he spoke more firmly than he had in years. "Miranda, I can't come back. This is the first vacation I've taken in 9 years. My son, your son is not my concern," Miranda interrupted. "Your job is my concern. And right now, your job is in serious jeopardy." "My vacation was approved. I followed every protocol. I have the email confirmation." Approvals can be reconsidered when circumstances change. This is a critical period for the company, and you chose to abandon your responsibilities for a beach trip. That shows me exactly where your priorities are. "My priorities?" Ethan's voice rose before he could stop it. "I have given this company 9 years. 9 years of missed birthdays, missed holidays, missed everything. I have sacrificed more than anyone should ever be asked to sacrifice, and I am asking for 1 week, 1 single week with my son." Miranda's response was ice. "Then you've made your choice. Consider this your official termination, effective immediately. HR will send the paperwork. You have 48 hours to return all company property." The line went dead. Ethan sat frozen, the phone still pressed to his ear, the sound of waves crashing somewhere in the distance. Fired. He had been fired. After 9 years of perfect performance, after being the person who held everything together, after sacrificing his health, his relationships, his presence in his own son's life, he had been discarded in a 3-minute phone call. "Dad?" Lucas was standing in front of him now, concern clouding his young features. "Dad, what's wrong? You look weird." Ethan stared at his son, really looked at him, and saw Sarah's eyes looking back. Those same warm brown eyes that had once promised him forever. Lucas was 9 years old. In 9 more years, he would be an adult, leaving for college, starting his own life. Half of Ethan's time with his son was already gone, spent in server rooms and conference calls and emergency meetings that had seemed so important at the time. He could call Miranda back. He could beg, grovel, promise to be on the next flight. He could salvage his career, keep the steady paycheck, maintain the illusion of stability. That was the safe choice, the responsible choice, the choice that fear demanded. But he had already spent 9 years making that choice. And what had it gotten him? A son who couldn't remember the last time they had done something together. A life measured in crisis responses and system uptime percentages. A hollow existence disguised as dedication. "Dad?" Lucas asked again, his small hand reaching out to touch Ethan's arm. Ethan looked at the phone in his hand. Then he looked at his son. And for the first time in 9 years, he made a different choice. He turned off the phone. "Everything's fine, buddy," Ethan said, pulling Lucas into a hug that surprised them both. "Everything's going to be fine. Now show me this moat you built. Does it actually hold water?" Lucas's face lit up with a smile that Ethan realized he hadn't seen nearly enough. "I don't know yet. We have to test it." As they walked together toward the shoreline, buckets in hand, Ethan felt something shift inside him. He had just lost his job, his income, his professional identity. By any rational measure, he should have been panicking, but instead, with his son's hand in his, watching the waves roll in under a cloudless sky, Ethan Cole felt free. It was the first step in a journey he never expected to take. The peace lasted exactly 14 hours. Ethan woke the next morning to find his phone, which he had reluctantly turned back on to check for any messages from Lucas's school, flooded with emails. 17 messages from Meridian Technologies, each one more threatening than the last. The first email came from HR, clinical and detached, outlining the termination process. He had 48 hours to return all company property: laptop, security badges, encrypted drives. Failure to comply would result in legal action. The second email came from the legal department. It referenced non-compete clauses he had signed years ago, buried in paperwork he barely remembered. According to their interpretation, Ethan was prohibited from working for any competitor for 18 months. They strongly suggested he not seek employment in the industry until the matter was reviewed. The third email came from Miranda herself. It was short, brutal, and designed to wound. "Your sudden departure has caused significant operational disruption. I have informed our industry contacts of your unreliable behavior. I suggest you consider your future career prospects carefully before making any decisions you might regret." Ethan read the message 3 times, each reading igniting a different emotion. First came fear, the cold, familiar terror of professional destruction. Then came anger, a burning recognition of the manipulation he had endured for years. Finally came something unexpected: clarity. Miranda was afraid. That was the only explanation for this aggressive response. If Ethan's departure truly meant nothing, if he was as replaceable as she had always implied, why the threats? Why the legal posturing? Why the effort to blacklist him from the entire industry? Because without him, things were falling apart. Over the next 2 days, Ethan received fragmented updates from former colleagues who dared to reach out despite the risk. The picture they painted was chaotic. Systems that Ethan had maintained single-handedly for years were failing in ways no one else understood. The documentation he had left behind, comprehensive, detailed, painstakingly organized, was apparently incomprehensible to engineers who had never bothered to learn how anything actually worked. Jenkins, the colleague who supposedly had the access codes, had accidentally locked himself out of 3 critical systems within the first 6 hours. Martinez, who knew the backup protocols, had returned from sick leave only to discover that the backups hadn't run properly in weeks, a problem Ethan had been manually correcting every night without telling anyone. The audit that Miranda had been so desperate to prepare for was now in serious jeopardy. Meridian Technologies, a company valued at several $100 million, was being held together by digital duct tape, and the only person who knew where all the tape was had just been fired for taking an approved vacation. Despite everything, Ethan felt guilty. He knew it was irrational. He knew Miranda's cruelty didn't deserve his compassion. But the colleagues now scrambling to fix problems they didn't understand. They were innocent. The clients who depended on systems Ethan had built, they had done nothing wrong. The junior engineers who would likely be blamed for failures beyond their control. They didn't deserve to suffer from Miranda's vindictiveness. Lucas noticed the change in his father's demeanor. They were eating lunch at a small seafood restaurant overlooking the water when the boy put down his fork and studied Ethan with an intensity that seemed far too mature for a 9-year-old. "You're thinking about work again," Lucas said. It wasn't a question. Ethan started to deny it, then stopped. He had spent years lying to his son about how present he was, how focused, how dedicated to their time together. He refused to do it anymore. "Yes," he admitted. "I am. I'm sorry, buddy." Lucas nodded slowly, processing this information with the careful consideration of someone who had learned early that adults didn't always tell the truth. "Are you going to leave?" The question hit Ethan like a physical blow. How many times had Lucas asked that question in his young life? How many times had the answer been yes? Yes, Daddy has to go to work. Yes, there's an emergency. Yes, this is important. "No," Ethan said, and he meant it with every fiber of his being. "I'm not going anywhere." Lucas smiled, but there was something guarded in his expression, a protective skepticism born from years of broken promises. "Okay, Dad." Ethan realized then that words would never be enough. Only actions, consistent, repeated, reliable actions, would ever rebuild the trust he had carelessly destroyed. That evening, the resort's main restaurant was busier than usual. A technology conference had apparently wrapped up in a nearby city, and several attendees had extended their trips for a few days of relaxation. The dining room hummed with conversations about market trends, product launches, and industry gossip. Ethan and Lucas found themselves seated at a small table near the window, slightly cramped due to the unexpected crowd. The host apologized for the tight quarters and mentioned that they might need to share their table if space became an issue. 20 minutes into their meal, it did. A man approached their table with an apologetic smile. He was in his late 50s, silver-haired, wearing the kind of casual clothing that looked simple, but probably cost more than Ethan's monthly rent. "I'm terribly sorry to intrude. The host mentioned you might have room for one more. Every other table is completely full." Ethan glanced at Lucas, who shrugged with the easy acceptance of a child. "Sure, no problem." The man sat down with a grateful nod. "Thank you. I'm Robert. Robert Ashford." Ethan introduced himself and Lucas, thinking nothing of the exchange. The name meant nothing to him. Robert ordered a modest meal and made polite small talk about the beach, the weather, the unusual crowd at the resort. It was Lucas who shifted the conversation in an unexpected direction. The boy had been quietly observing Robert's phone, which displayed a notification from an app Ethan recognized instantly, a proprietary monitoring dashboard used by major tech infrastructure companies. "My dad knows that program," Lucas said with the guileless honesty of youth. "He works on stuff like that all the time." Robert raised an eyebrow, looking at Ethan with renewed interest. "Is that so? What kind of work do you do?" "Operations engineering," Ethan said, suddenly uncomfortable with the attention. "Back-end systems, infrastructure management. Nothing glamorous." Robert leaned forward slightly. "Which company?" "Meridian Technologies." The words came out automatically, followed by a bitter correction. "Actually, I should say former company. I was terminated yesterday." "Meridian." Robert repeated the name thoughtfully. "I know Meridian. Impressive infrastructure for a company their size, particularly their failover systems and the real-time synchronization protocols. Very elegant architecture. Industry analysts have written about it." Ethan blinked, caught off guard by the specific technical knowledge. "You follow back-end infrastructure analysis?" Robert smiled, a knowing expression that suggested Ethan was missing something important. "In my line of work, I pay attention to who builds things that actually function. Most companies talk about reliability. Very few achieve it. Meridian achieved it. I always wondered who was responsible." "That would be me," Ethan said quietly. "Most of it, anyway. over the past 9 years. The conversation that followed lasted nearly 2 hours. Lucas eventually fell asleep in his chair, head resting against Ethan's arm, while the two men talked about systems architecture, operational philosophy, and the invisible work that kept modern technology functioning. Robert Ashford, Ethan gradually learned, was not just a conference attendee with a technical interest. He was the founder and chairman of Cascade Dynamics, one of the largest cloud infrastructure companies in the world. The man sitting across from Ethan, sharing a modest dinner at a beach resort, was worth several $billion and wielded influence that shaped how the entire tech industry operated. "You're telling me," Robert said slowly, "that you built most of Meridian's core infrastructure by yourself, maintained it for 9 years, and they fired you for taking a vacation?" "An approved vacation," Ethan clarified. "I had written authorization." Robert shook his head, something between disbelief and disgust crossing his features. "I've met Miranda Hale at industry events, always found her impressive in a superficial way. Clearly, I misjudged the situation." "She's very good at appearing competent," Ethan said. "The actual competence is usually borrowed from people she doesn't credit. People like you." Ethan didn't deny it. For the first time in his career, he didn't minimize his contributions or deflect praise onto others. He simply nodded. Robert was quiet for a long moment, studying Ethan with an evaluating gaze that felt different from Miranda's constant assessment. Miranda had always looked at him as a tool, useful, functional, ultimately disposable. Robert looked at him as something else entirely. "I'd like to continue this conversation," Robert said finally. "Not tonight. Your son needs a proper bed, and I've monopolized enough of your evening. But before you make any decisions about your future, I want you to know that people like you don't come along often. And companies that treat people like you the way Meridian has, they deserve what's coming to them." He handed Ethan a business card, simple, elegant, bearing only a name and phone number. "Call me when you're ready to talk about what comes next." The fallout at Meridian Technologies accelerated faster than anyone had predicted. Within 72 hours of Ethan's termination, 3 major clients had filed formal complaints about system instabilities. The audit preparation, which Miranda had claimed was the reason for demanding Ethan's immediate return, had ground to a complete halt. Auditors were asking questions that no one at the company could answer, requesting documentation that apparently didn't exist outside of Ethan's personal files. Word spread through industry networks with the speed of digital gossip. Former colleagues began reaching out to Ethan directly, some apologizing for not defending him, others asking technical questions they desperately needed answered, a few simply checking in to make sure he was okay. The most significant contact came from Diane Mercer, Meridian's longest-standing client, and the CEO of a healthcare technology company that depended on Meridian's infrastructure for critical patient data systems. "Ethan, I need to be direct with you," Diane said during a phone call that Ethan took on the resort's quiet back patio. "Miranda told us you abandoned the company during a crisis, that you left without warning and refused to return. But that doesn't match anything I know about you from 9 years of working together. What actually happened?" Ethan told her the truth: the approved vacation, the phone call, the termination, the threatening emails, and the industry blacklist. Diane's response was immediate and fierce. "She fired you for taking vacation time she personally approved, and then tried to blame you for the consequences?" "That's an accurate summary." "Ethan, do you have documentation? The approval email, the termination call, the threats?" "I have everything." "Good, because I'm pulling my contract from Meridian by the end of the month, and I won't be the only one." The pressure to return intensified dramatically after that conversation. Miranda apparently realized that losing Ethan was one thing, but losing major clients because of how she had treated him was something else entirely. The threatening tone of her communications shifted to something almost conciliatory, though the manipulation remained transparent. "Ethan, I think we both said things we didn't mean," one email read. "The company needs you. Your colleagues need you. Whatever disagreements we've had, surely we can find a way to move forward professionally. Let's discuss a return package that addresses your concerns. No apology, no acknowledgement of wrongdoing, just the assumption that Ethan could be bought back with the right combination of money and vague promises. He read the email while sitting on the beach, watching Lucas attempt to fly a kite they had purchased from a local shop. The boy was laughing, running against the wind, completely absorbed in the simple joy of the moment. This was what Ethan had missed. This was what he had sacrificed. And Miranda thought she could buy it back with a return package. The guilt still gnawed at him. Colleagues were suffering. Clients were being harmed. Systems he had built with care and dedication were failing in ways that would take months to repair. Part of him, the part that had been conditioned over 9 years to solve every problem, fix every crisis, sacrifice everything for professional obligation, wanted desperately to go back. But another part of him, a part that had been silent for far too long, asked a different question. If he returned now, what message would that send to Lucas? That promises could be broken when work called. That family always came second. That self-sacrifice was the only acceptable response to unreasonable demands. Ethan had grown up watching his own father work himself into an early grave, dying of a heart attack at 53, leaving behind a successful career and a family who barely knew him. He had sworn he would be different. He had failed that promise spectacularly, but failure didn't have to be permanent. If he went back to Meridian, he would be teaching Lucas that boundaries didn't matter. That loyalty flowed in only one direction, that a man's value was determined by how much he was willing to sacrifice for people who would never sacrifice anything in return. He couldn't do it. He wouldn't do it. Miranda Hale arrived at the beach resort on the 5th day of Ethan's vacation. He spotted her crossing the sand toward him, her expensive heels sinking awkwardly with each step. She looked out of place in this casual environment. Designer suit, perfect hair, an expression that mixed desperation with barely concealed fury. Lucas was swimming in the shallow water nearby, supervised by a lifeguard. Ethan had approximately 3 minutes of private conversation before his son would notice the intrusion. "You've been ignoring my calls," Miranda said without preamble. "I've been on vacation." "This isn't a joke, Ethan. The company is falling apart. The audit is a disaster. 3 major clients are threatening to leave. Do you have any idea what's happening because of your selfishness?" Ethan remained seated in his beach chair, forcing Miranda to stand over him in an awkward display of attempted dominance. "I have some idea, yes." "Then come back. Name your price, salary increase, title change, whatever you want. We can pretend this entire situation never happened. Can we pretend you didn't fire me for taking an approved vacation? Can we pretend you didn't threaten to blacklist me from the entire industry? Can we pretend you didn't call my dedication to my son selfishness?" Miranda's composure cracked slightly. "I was under pressure. The audit timeline, the board's expectations. You don't understand the position I was in. I understand perfectly. You were in a difficult position, so you took it out on the person least likely to fight back. That's what you've always done, Miranda. That's what you do to everyone who works for you. This isn't about me. This is about the company, about your colleagues who are drowning right now because you're sitting on a beach." Ethan finally stood, bringing himself to eye level with the woman who had controlled his professional life for years. "My colleagues are drowning because you created a system where one person was responsible for everything critical, and then you fired that person without a succession plan. That's not my failure. That's yours." Miranda's face flushed. "If you don't come back, the company could collapse. Hundreds of people could lose their jobs. Is that what you want? To be responsible for destroying everything?" "I'm not responsible for destroying anything. You are." For a moment, something almost human flickered across Miranda's features. Fear, perhaps, or the dawning recognition that her manipulation tactics weren't working. Please. The word came out strained, unfamiliar on her lips. I'm asking you to help us, to help me. Whatever happened between us, the company doesn't deserve to fail. Ethan looked past her to where Lucas was now waving from the water, gesturing for his father to come join him. You're right about one thing, Ethan said quietly. The company doesn't deserve to fail. Neither did I. But you made your choice, Miranda. Now I'm making mine. He walked past her toward the water, toward his son, toward a future that didn't include Meridian Technologies. Behind him, Miranda Hale stood alone on the sand, watching everything she had built begin to crumble. The collapse of Meridian Technologies became industry news within a week. Ethan learned about it the way most people did, through headlines and notifications that appeared on his phone despite his attempts to disconnect. The audit had failed catastrophically. Systems that Ethan had maintained for 9 years revealed critical vulnerabilities that no one else knew how to address. 3 more major clients, following Diane Mercer's lead, announced their intention to terminate contracts. Stock prices plummeted. Investors demanded answers. The board of directors launched an emergency investigation. What they discovered was damning. Years of neglected infrastructure investment, covered up by one overworked engineer who had quietly held everything together. A management culture that punished honesty and rewarded appearances. A COO who had systematically taken credit for successes while deflecting blame for failures onto subordinates who were too exhausted or too afraid to object. Miranda Hale's carefully constructed image began to crack. Former employees came forward with stories that painted a picture of systemic dysfunction. Engineers who had been fired for raising concerns about technical debt. Managers who had been pushed out for questioning unrealistic timelines. A pattern of intimidation and manipulation that stretched back years, all hidden beneath impressive quarterly reports and confident board presentations. The investigation revealed that Ethan's termination was not an isolated incident of poor judgment, but the culmination of a management philosophy built on exploitation. Miranda had created a system where essential knowledge was concentrated in individuals she could control, then discarded those individuals the moment they became inconvenient. Ethan followed the news with a mixture of vindication and sorrow. He took no pleasure in watching colleagues lose their jobs as the company contracted. He felt no satisfaction seeing Miranda's career implode under the weight of her own decisions. The destruction unfolding was not something he had wanted. It was simply the inevitable consequence of years of unsustainable practices finally catching up with reality. Lucas noticed the change in his father during these days. Ethan was present, engaged, fully committed to their remaining vacation time, but there was a heaviness in his expression that the boy recognized. "Dad, are you sad about your old job?" They were sitting on the beach, watching the sunset paint the Carolina sky in shades of orange and pink. It was their second to last evening at the resort, and Ethan had been quieter than usual. "I'm sad for the people who are being hurt," Ethan said honestly. "I'm sad that things had to fall apart this way, but I'm not sad about leaving. I should have left a long time ago." Lucas nodded, absorbing this information with the thoughtful consideration he had inherited from his mother. "Mom would have told you to leave, wouldn't she?" The question caught Ethan off guard. Lucas rarely mentioned Sarah, not because he had forgotten her, but because the memories were complicated for a child who had never really known her. "Yes," Ethan said, his voice thick with emotion. "She would have told me to leave years ago. She always said that a job should serve your life, not the other way around. I forgot that for a long time. But you remember now?" Ethan pulled his son close, holding him against the cooling evening breeze. "Yeah, buddy. I remember now." Robert Ashford called on the morning of their last day at the resort. "I've been following the news about Meridian," Robert said. "Quite a spectacular implosion. I imagine you've been getting calls from every recruiter in the industry." Ethan laughed despite himself. "A few dozen, yes. Apparently being the person who held a failing company together for 9 years makes you attractive to other companies, hoping to replicate that arrangement. And you're not interested in those offers. I'm not interested in being another company's indispensable workhorse. I did that once. It cost me 9 years with my son. Robert's response was immediate. Good, because that's not what I'm offering. The conversation that followed was unlike any job discussion Ethan had ever experienced. Robert didn't talk about salary requirements or performance metrics or expected hours. Instead, he talked about philosophy, about building companies that treated employees as human beings rather than resources, about sustainable growth rather than exploitation, about the kind of workplace culture that created genuine innovation instead of just extracting maximum effort from exhausted people. I want you to join Cascade Dynamics, Robert said. Not as another operations engineer expected to sacrifice everything for the job, as a strategic leader. Someone who helps us build systems and teams that don't require any single person to destroy themselves for the company's success. Ethan listened carefully, waiting for the catch. There was always a catch. Generous offers always came with hidden expectations, unstated demands, the assumption that gratitude would translate into unlimited availability. What about flexibility? Ethan asked. My son is 9. I've already missed most of his childhood. I need to be present for what's left. You'll have full control over your schedule. Remote work whenever you need it. No expectation of after-hours availability unless you choose it. We measure results, not hours logged. And compensation? Robert named a figure that made Ethan blink. It was nearly triple his Meridian salary, with equity options that could be worth substantially more if the company continued its growth trajectory. That seems excessive for what you're describing. It's appropriate for what you're worth, Robert corrected. Ethan, I've spent 40 years building companies. I've learned to recognize people who are genuinely exceptional, not just competent, not just reliable, but the kind of people who elevate everything around them. You are one of those people. Miranda Hale was too short-sighted to see it. I'm not. Ethan was quiet for a long moment, staring out the window at the beach where Lucas was packing up their belongings, preparing for the drive home. I need to think about it. Take all the time you need. The offer stands whenever you're ready. 3 weeks later, Ethan Cole started his new position at Cascade Dynamics. The transition was everything Robert had promised, and more. Ethan worked from home most days, his schedule built around Lucas's school hours and activities. He attended soccer games and parent-teacher conferences. He cooked dinner every night, helped with homework, and was present for bedtime stories, something he hadn't done consistently since Lucas was a toddler. The work itself was challenging and fulfilling. Ethan wasn't just maintaining systems anymore. He was designing new approaches to infrastructure management, building teams that could function without relying on any single person's heroic efforts. He was teaching others what he knew, creating documentation that actually made sense, establishing processes that would survive his eventual departure, whenever that might come. For the first time in his career, Ethan felt valued rather than exploited. News of Miranda Hale reached him occasionally. She had been removed from her position at Meridian following the board investigation. The company itself had been acquired at a significant discount by a competitor, its remaining employees absorbed into a larger organization. Miranda's industry reputation, once formidable, had been permanently damaged by the revelations of her management practices. Ethan felt no satisfaction in her downfall. He simply felt free. On a Saturday morning in late autumn, Ethan and Lucas returned to the Carolina coast. Not to the same resort. That place held complicated memories, but to a different beach, a fresh start. They walked along the shoreline together, collecting shells, dodging waves, talking about everything and nothing. Lucas was animated in a way Ethan had rarely seen, sharing stories from school, asking questions about the future, making plans for adventures they might take together. "Dad?" Lucas said as they paused to examine a particularly interesting shell. "Yeah, buddy? I'm glad you got fired." Ethan laughed, surprised by the bluntness. "That's an unusual thing to be glad about. I mean it. Lucas looked up at his father with Sarah's eyes, warm and serious. You're different now. You're actually here. Not just your body, you. All of you. The words hit Ethan with unexpected force. For 9 years, he had believed he was doing the right thing, providing stability, building security, sacrificing for his family's future. But his son had needed something far simpler, a father who was present. I should have figured that out a long time ago, Ethan said. I'm sorry it took so long. That's okay. Lucas smiled, the guarded skepticism that had shadowed his expression for years finally beginning to fade. You figured it out eventually. That's what matters. They continued walking, father and son, the autumn sun warming their faces as waves rolled endlessly against the shore. Behind them, the footprints they left in the sand stretched back toward a past Ethan could no longer change. Ahead of them lay a future built on different choices. Being fired had felt like an ending. It turned out to be the beginning of everything that actually mattered. Ethan had spent 9 years teaching his son an unintended lesson. That work came first, that sacrifice was expected, that a person's value was measured by how much they gave up for others. Now he had the chance to teach a different lesson, that boundaries were not selfishness, that presence was more valuable than provision, and that a person's worth should never be traded away for people who would never reciprocate. It was, he realized, the most important lesson he would ever teach, and it had taken losing everything to finally understand it.